Hi, Gideon. Over to you. You can start.
I was actually on mute. I was speaking earlier. um, yeah, so good morning, everyone. It's actually, good to have you all on the session. My name is Gideon Babatunde. I'm a cybersecurity consultant. I currently work with KPMG Canada, and I've been practicing cybersecurity for the past couple of years. I have diverse experience in several areas, including GRC, which is what we will be looking at today. But prior to that, I just want to, thank you all for having me on the session. It's my pleasure to be here with you all today. It's really a privilege to connect with fellow professionals, and to share knowledge amongst ourselves. For a fact, I've gained so much, knowledge as well from, particularly a mentor in from Techhaven, Helen. Helen is a good colleague of mine. We've grown together in the field of cybersecurity, over the years. We've exchanged ideas, we've shared knowledge, and it's really good. I just want us to know that we are in, good company, with our professional colleagues here. And so today we're just going to be looking at, actually, I want to share three of these topics with us, but for today we'll be looking at two of these topics. The first one is soft skills for cybersecurity consulting. And, this is particularly for people who, want to come into the field of cybersecurity consulting. There are so many roles in cybersecurity, and one might actually get confused. There's so much to choose from, but I just decided to share this with us. If anyone aspires to go into cybersecurity consulting, these tips I'll be sharing with us today would be very vital. And after that, we'll be looking at data privacy and compliance assessment, data privacy audits and compliance assessment. Where I'll be sharing tips on how to conduct your data privacy audits, how even businesses can ensure that they comply with regulations. And hopefully in our next session next week, we should touch on cyber risk management. So once again, thank you all for having me on the session. So right away, cybersecurity consulting, particularly in the area of GRC, is an interesting role, right, amongst many other job roles in cyber, as I mentioned. Now, it's actually kind of a unique field. And what makes cybersecurity consulting unique is the fact that, you get to work with various clients, and you encounter various challenges, several challenges on the job, which is good for growth, career growth, career development. And in relation to other cyber roles, I would say the tasks required of a cybersecurity consultant is actually more dynamic. You never really get to say you have, conquered or mastered all your job tasks, right? And that's because, inherently you get to meet, you provide consultation services in the area of cybersecurity, to clients. And in doing that, you get to understand their, organizational structures, what challenges they face, how they run their operations, what are their processes. And so this is just an encouragement, for those of us who might want to, venture into this. I would say it's a good one. The very first topic for the day, as I mentioned, we'll be touching on, skills required to, succeed, to excel in the field of cybersecurity consulting, particularly or specifically in the area of GRC. GRC means governance, risk, and compliance. For those of us who do not know, I think I'll shed more light on that in due time. So the key areas we'll be looking at on this topic, are audit skills, right? As a cybersecurity consultant, you would require all these skills, right? And of course, you don't have to have all of them at once, but when you start your journey, you develop this over time and from experience on the job, just as so many of us have learned. So audit skills. Now, the first thing, I would like us to know is what an audit is, right? What is now audit in the context of cybersecurity, right? because there are so many other audits. There's operational audit, financial audit, but we'll be looking at where we are specifically concerned about cybersecurity audit. And the goal or objective of an audit is basically to essentially to conduct an independent or an objective review of controls, processes, strategies, and operations of the subject, which is the business. Basically, it entails assessing evidence to determine or conclude on level of appropriateness, effectiveness and efficiency of the environment. We use that to establish facts. And secondly, which brings me to the second point, a key approach to the audit methodology is what we call professional skepticism. And when you go in with this mindset, you have a professional, you go in with an approach of professional skepticism. It actually helps you, conduct your job better. Just as I mentioned, audit is an independent and objective review of controls. And that means that when you when an information is passed across to you as an auditor, you do not take it for a fact until you have examined substantial, adequate evidence to conclude, that okay, this is actually a fact, right? And so we'll also in the next section we'll be touching on what evidence is and the skills that that will help you thrive in on an audit role as a cybersecurity consultant. So the okay, we'll touch on that in the next section. So basically, in an audit, an auditor would need to so we'll take an auditor as individuals like you and I, right? An auditor would need to obtain and review documents, conduct walkthroughs, have meetings with various stakeholders, just to arrive at a conclusion that his assessment is a fact, right? And all of that will be documented appropriately. So the next thing you do once you the next phase of your audit of an audit or an audit program is where or the final phase is where you write your report based on your review. And in that report, your duty is to detail the level of compliance, if there are exceptions, based on what you have audited. But so just before I skip this, now when you conduct an audit, you are to you are auditing against a particular framework. So if you're auditing a process, you're auditing strategy, you're auditing controls, maybe cybersecurity controls, it could be administrative controls as well. You are to, you are doing that against a framework. You are doing that against a framework. It could be a framework, it could be a standard, it could be a regulation. And the final topic we'll be touching on, is actually is an audit against a regulation, where we get to use a case study, or we'll use a case study of a regulation, of a globally recognized regulation, and I will walk you through how an audit is conducted. Hopefully, we get to see how these skills are applied on that in that area. So like I said, when you write your reports, based on your review, you detail the level of compliance of what you have audited against the framework or standard or regulation which you're auditing against. Also, you get to document in your report, you document your observations, right? You document what did you observe, what did you find, your findings, you document the gaps, it could be process gaps, right? It could be maturity gaps, and you also make recommendations. Depending on the nature of the audit anyway, or assessment, you get to make recommendations. You also get to develop roadmaps based on the assessment. So this is essentially what an audit entails, right? And so in order to excel or in order to conduct your audit successfully and effectively, you would need to apply audit skills. So an evidence is we could call it a piece of material information that could enable an auditor arrive at a conclusion to determine its level of effectiveness, level of adequacy, or appropriateness against the framework. So basically, when you obtain an evidence, what you the things you look at, when you obtain an evidence. Okay, let me give example of evidence to make it clearer to us. So an example of evidence could be a policy, a security policy document, right? It could be a snapshot of a particular control in operation. And so these are examples of evidences, right? It could even be physical, right? And so when you obtain an evidence as an auditor, the key thing the things you do with those evidence is you look at with the evidence is where you look at where the evidence is coming from. What system was this generated from? So as an auditor, when say I'm auditing the security control or configuration of a server, I need to look at where did you generate this information from? Was it generated from a system? Did you do this did you generate this manually, right? Who provided the evidence is also a key thing we look at. The third thing we look at is, what date was the evidence generated? So basically, essentially, when you conduct your audits, is usually within a time frame. So you could say you're auditing, even in other areas of audit like financial and operational, it has a time frame, it has a timeline, and you could say you are auditing for this quarter, the first quarter of 2022. And so when you are provided evidence, you need to be certain that that evidence is applicable and appropriate for the time in which you are auditing, or relevant as well. The fourth thing you also look at is, so was it endorsed? Now, this is in the case of, I could say, so if you obtain a security policy, right, security policy document from your client, you have to ascertain or determine that that document is actually in use. This is because there are instances where the auditee, right, or the subject might just provide you a document that actually isn't in operation, actually isn't in, wasn't utilized, and then they just generate it manually. They just curate something and give to you. You need to determine that that piece of evidence was endorsed or signed by the appropriate person. So in this case, a security policy is usually, signed off by and reviewed by senior management, right? So you need to see that. You need to see the date it was signed. And the next thing you also look at is the last review date. So also, if you're looking at the policy document as an evidence, right? So a policy, what a policy document does is, a policy document can serve as evidence that the organization actually have some sort of governance in the area in which you are auditing. So they have security governance, and the first and most important document in security governance is a policy document, which is a security policy document. So if you can obtain a security document and you ascertain all of these, right? This first point that, okay, this document was provided by the IT security team, right? Also or the CISO or the security manager. Secondly, the document was endorsed by the senior management, right? That gives you some level of confidence that that evidence you are looking at is relevant, and it shows you can to some extent understand that, or gain the understanding that the organization prioritizes security, essentially. And then you can then go forward to look at this final point, which is you then critically examine the context of that evidence. In this case, you're looking at clauses within the document, and you have to ensure that all the requirements are in line with standards, framework, and best practices. Uh, what I've just explained, are things you get to do in audit. This is more or less a routine, right? Especially when you're doing risk and compliance. In risk and compliance, especially compliance, as the word implies, there's a framework, and you audit, the operation, you audit the controls to determine the level of compliance with that regulation, standard, or framework. And also, as a consultant, a site security consultant, you are to apply your vast or your understanding of what's going on in the industry, right? So if what the organization has is good, if say it's a process you are reviewing and their process is to some level, to an extent considered mature, right, you could also still make recommendations for them to increase their maturity, the maturity of that process. So in as regards all these skills, um, the recommendation I would make, to us is a key, which is the first one is a very important one, right? Because in the area of cybersecurity, it's you you have to align yourself with, or you have to be a part of several, organizations. One of the leading organizations in cybersecurity is ISACA. It's, globally known, globally recognized, and they have a vast range of resources, to enable us, us or professionals conduct, various kinds of, audits. So if you're looking to improve your audit skill, then I would recommend that you sign up with, you become a member of these professional bodies, right? You have the ISACA, as I mentioned, they have great resources. Every cybersecurity professional is, or majority are part of that. Secondly, you could also take the ISO and IEC, training. They have some audits training depending on the area you want to specialize in. But as regards information security management system, right, you can take ISO 27001. LA means lead auditor. And if you also take this, or you study, you get trained on it, it can help you to develop your audit skills. And finally, you have the PCI DSS QSA. QSA means Qualified Security Assessor, and this is also a vital resource. So these three are, if you actually consult these resources, you will, improve your audit skill. And the second thing we'll look at is technical skills. Now, of course, it goes without saying, cybersecurity is a very technical field, right? In as much as the role GRC is more high level, where you're looking at things from a strategic point, right, rather than a technical point, cybersecurity is still hinged on technical controls. And so, if you're looking to go into cybersecurity consulting, you need to actually pick an area in which you would like to specialize in. I'm talking about even in the area of GRC. So examples are, from the third point, you could say you want to specialize in application security, right? Or it could be application application penetration test. You know, if you want to consult or specialize in that area, then you need to have technical skills as well as audit skills. You could also say, okay, you want to be a vulnerability management specialist. That also has technical components to it. You could say you want to go into cloud security, where you might have to learn a little bit about cloud computing and then focus more on the security side. So for your audit, you could say a client could engage you and say, we need you to conduct security controls assessment. And if you are to do that, definitely it's a technical engagement. They have lots of technical controls in place. It could be, to review their network infrastructure, right? It could be to review their VPN. It could be a VPN audit. It could be whatever, solution they have, whatever they need you to do. And so if you work on, training yourself, conducting research, you would actually improve your technical skill. And finally, um, you are also required in the area of technical skills as a consultant. You are required to know the tools and technologies used by your clients. So there are instances where you are familiar with one tool, right? And then a client you are working with uses the same category of tool, but a different one. So, an example is a SIM solution, or let me use, say, a VPN, right? a VPN, we all know what a VPN is. A VPN is what helps you remotely, securely access, your organization's network remotely. And so your client might be using a different variant, right? And so if you are to provide the best service to them, if you are to give them the best information, you would need to learn their tools. And so, yeah, that's for technical skills. Those are things you need to do. And I'll recommend, that you determine what area you intend to specialize in, like as I mentioned. Secondly, you undertake specific training in that area, right? And when you do, it gives you a very, solid understanding, solid foundation of what you are to provide, consulting services to on. Um, and yeah, so the next thing is to know the best practices, in that area. So if you're looking at cloud security, what are the best practices in cloud security? What are the applicable standards, frameworks, regulation? If you do that, you would be a very solid, GRC consultant in that specialization. Also, I would recommend, that you explore other areas. The reason is because as a consultant, there are so many expectations. The objective for any consultant is to get as many jobs as possible and provide values to businesses. You want to make an impact, right, in the industry. And so you need to broaden your scope. So if you pick, say, you go into vulnerability management or penetration testing, when you feel you have a good understanding of that area and you can advise on that topic, then you can also pick some other area. Especially, I would recommend you pick areas that are trending, emerging, yeah, areas that are trending. For example, blockchain, right? Cloud computing, even application security is good. So it's always advisable to do that. And if you apply this, it will help you develop your technical skill coming into the role or advancing on the role of cyber consultant. So the next thing we will look at is project management skill. Now, in the area of project management, it is imperative, to effectively manage the project in order to derive client satisfaction and win more business, because that is your objective. As a consultant, if you're working on your own, you have your firm, you have your cybersecurity consulting firm, and you win contracts, right? You bid for contracts, or you are working as an employee in a consulting firm. It is imperative that you have project management skills and you effectively manage projects. That will help the business or your business win more contracts or maintain good professional relationship with the client. So essentially, a consultant is a project manager. As I mentioned, every engagement requires good project management. uh, Now, secondly, I'm sure so many of us, working in several fields, sales, marketing, whatever field we have that understanding of project management. It's something we have been doing already. And, that knowledge is not a waste. It's actually very valid. In fact, if you feel you are very good, you have very good project management skills, I can say for a fact that you would actually excel, you would thrive in the field of, it could be audit. So GRC audit is one of those. You would do very well in audit. Um, so of course the attributes of the project are scope, schedule, and cost of the budget, right? And so you have to, as a consultant, to effectively manage your project or your engagement. So we call it engagement. Whenever you win a contract, an advisory, it could be a technology advisory or cyber advisory job with a client, we call it engagement. And so to effectively, manage the engagement, you need to look at the scope. What is the scope? What's the boundary? The essence of scope is, to define a boundary, around which you will work. Then you look at the schedule. Now, how to do that is you you have to come up with a schedule. You have to look at, when you examine the scope, you then itemize all the tasks that need to be done to execute that project, and you itemize them in form of hierarchy. What comes first, what comes next, And finally, what do you have to do to close out on the engagement to meet your deliverables at the right time? So when you are able to, we call it a work breakdown structure. When you do that, you itemize all the tasks that are required. Then you itemize, you identify and you itemize the time that all those tasks can be completed. And of course, you have to use or select realistic time. And then once you agree with the client, you can then work according to that schedule. Of course, you will need to know how to make adjustments, but essentially, if you apply, keen project management, a good knowledge of project management, your project management skill, you would execute the job effectively. So of course, my recommendation for project management would be to take project management courses. And as I mentioned, so many of us already have that, so we could just leverage on it, and go ahead to just learn, cybersecurity technical skills or all these skills, or a combination of both, because you need those to excel or progress in the field. So another area we'll look at is presentation and communication. Now, I think this is not just it's not just specific to cybersecurity. It cuts across every other field, right? But of course, you need to have, as a consultant, you need to perform at a high level. You need to have very decent presentation and communication skill. So in the context of presentation, you need to determine the information you want to pass across to the various stakeholders, because that is what our job is about. That's what you will do every day, every time. You get to meet various stakeholders. You understand, you understand. Okay, stakeholders could be, the senior executives, could be the board of directors, could be the business unit managers, right? And because you are trying to gain an understanding of their structure, their processes, you need to have meetings with them. So essentially, you would determine the information you want to pass across to them, and the best way to do it is could be in the form of graphical illustrations. If you are to use a PowerPoint, then you can go ahead. If you are to use a spreadsheet, you have to just send an email, right? If you don't need any vocal or verbal discussion with the client, then you can just send an email to them, right? You can also make video presentations, use of infographic, and likes. So something you need to do, a skill, an aspect of presentation that will help you in your presentation and communication is developing, uh, knowing how to use presentation tools, like data analytics tools, say Power BI, right? uh, Excel, PowerPoint, Visio, and other tools that are available to communicate effectively and present your information to the client. So a key thing which I must say, um, that you are tasked with, that you have to do and you have to improve on and you have to learn, is how to be diplomatic. Now, diplomatic means you know how to be, you are sensitive to every stakeholder's concern, right? When you meet with several stakeholders, you need to be sensitive to their concern. You need to build a good relationship, and you need to effectively drive communications between all the stakeholders. If you are diplomatic, you would actually achieve results. And then I would say you should also be pragmatic. So pragmatic means you provide actionable, you make actionable statements or recommendations, right? Not just on a theoretical or conceptual level. So the best way to provide values, right, as a cybersecurity consultant to businesses, is to ensure that your recommendations are actionable. They are not just theoretical, and they are not confused. So when you communicate with them, and you need to determine, you need to ascertain that they understand what you have communicated. Now, finally, my last point on this would be that you seek to understand the client also, because a communication is a two-way thing. It's not just you communicating to them. You also have to understand what is being communicated to you, because you want to understand them better. You want to understand their security posture. You want to understand their processes. You want to understand their strategies in order to provide advice, right, to provide that value. And so you whenever information is communicated to you, you need to uh, try to understand and then communicate your understanding of what has been communicated to you. So if the client tells you, oh, for our security team, this is what we have, this is how we run, maybe incident, if you're looking at the area of incident management or incident response, this is what we have in place. This is how we want to do it, this is how things are done here, and we're looking at moving it from this level to this level, and we'll need you to guide us through this phase. You would then once you have understood that, you would then tell them, you speak it back to the client. You say, okay, so what I understand is this, and that way everybody's on the same page. The risk of so we call it a project risk. The risk of everyone not being if you don't communicate effectively, you stand the risk of you stand what we call a project risk. And in that project risk, a fatal issue that could come up would be that you did not understand the client's requirements, and so the final deliverable after months of discussion, you did not meet that crucial requirement. But there is a mitigating step to that, and that is, I call it a feedback loop, right? And that means you have to constantly communicate. It's also an essential part of project management, where you give status updates, right? You give feedbacks on what has been done, and then if in that feedback loop, everybody gets to adjust whatever process needs to be adjusted. um, and so finally, we look at relationship building and networking with professionals. This is I can't overemphasize the importance of relationship building and networking in the area, if as a cybersecurity consultant. Now, this is because, as I mentioned, you get to face different challenges, new challenges on every job, on every engagement you have. You need to, because no individual is a fortress of knowledge. You need to actually connect with your peers. Now, when you connect with your peers in this instance, you don't divulge specifics. You just try to understand things from a high level, right? Or you say, oh, hi, how do you say, okay, you're auditing a network infrastructure, right? You're auditing the client's network infrastructure, and you want to determine, let me be explicit. So the client has given you their network diagram, right? Which is what we call an evidence. And when you look at that network diagram, with your technical skills, you have the understanding that, okay, this network is designed appropriately, meaning, it's properly segregated or segmented, right? But you then want to determine that that infrastructure, the network infrastructure, was implemented the exact way you see it on the diagram, right? You might actually be confused. If you are not a network engineer, you might say, oh, how do I actually determine that? And so you could just casually reach out to your colleague and say, hi, so what would so you're not giving specifics, because that would be breach of your your confidential non-disclosure agreement. But you just try to understand things from a high level, and you would derive maximum values from that. You would also be very effective at what you do. As I mentioned, even my colleague Helen, who is on the call with us, has provided me very robust technical advice. So it's something that, as a consultant, you really need to work on the skill, right? you need to work on your relationship building and networking with professionals. Now, also in the context of relationship building, you need to not just build relationships with your, not just build professional relationship with your colleagues or your peers. You also need to do that with your clients, and that is because you always want to get more jobs from them. So if they called you to do a data privacy audit now, they could also call you to come and do another scope of work for them or type of work. And so with good relationship building skills and efforts, you would get to maintain business relationships with your clients. So to summarize, all of what we have talked about, when you develop these skills, your audit skills, your technical skills, relationship building skills, right, you would be more effective at your job. It helps you execute your job better. It becomes easy. But to be frank, that doesn't happen in one day. It happens over time. It happens with experience. And all we just have to do is take that first step. Just look at, you need to just assess what area of cybersecurity do I want to go into. And when you do that, also, I need to mention that whatever skill you have learned in not just IT, generally, even in your field, can be applied to cybersecurity. And the reason is because cybersecurity works very closely with business. It's actually regarded as a business enabler, right? So cybersecurity it doesn't work in isolation. So let me give you a classical example. When we talk about cyber risk is actually a subset of technology risk, which is also a subset of operations risk, which is also a subset of enterprise risk. And so, as a cybersecurity consultant, whatever skill you have, or if you are going into cybersecurity, whatever skill you have in any area of your work, you can apply that to on the new role. So yeah, I would recommend that aspiring professionals should actively work on these areas. And yeah, so the next thing we'll be looking at, we're going into the next section now.
Yeah. Gideon.
Yeah.
Maybe people might have questions before we move into the data privacy. We might want to just give.
Okay, that's so let's have our questions, everyone. I would like that feedback, to even know that we are following all that's been discussed. So please, you could ask your questions. You could send in your questions in the chat as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Victor. Yeah. So, does anyone have any questions? If you have any questions, please.
Okay. Yes. Thank you, Gideon. Thank you so much for your presentation so far. Right. Okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah. The skills you mentioned: audit, technical communication, project management. Okay. Yeah. So what I want to ask is this: how does one get the technical skill? Because what you don't have, you cannot give. And we want to be the one to audit, meaning that we must be ahead of the people that we are even auditing. How do we acquire this technical skill and be able to marry it with other skills?
That's a very good question.
Are there certifications that one can do and leverage on that could quickly help one to be in charge of that area? Yeah. Thank you.
That's a very good question. So essentially, to develop your technical skills, you have to, like as I mentioned earlier, you need to look at because cybersecurity is very broad. There are so many, I can count up to 10, 13 roles that exist in cybersecurity. There are more technical rules like incident response, vulnerability management, penetration testing, right? Application security, cloud security, data breach, digital forensics. And so because there are so many of these roles, and it's almost impossible to master all of them. You have to just say, okay, this is what I want to specialize in. Let me give you an example. um, Personally, I had earlier in my career, I actually had programming experience. I worked with one of these firms that develop software, C#.net. If we have any programmers in the house, and you know I I got to understand that, okay, programming is not really for me, right? It's not what I want to do long term. It's not that I was bad at it, but I just felt I don't see myself doing this for the next 10 years. And so I can tell you that even till date, it's been so long since I left that, since I left programming, so many things have changed. But even that knowledge that I had in the area of programming, whenever I get, say, an application security job, I can still apply it. Now, what I'm trying to say is, to develop your technical skill, just look at all the roles and decide on one. And it's also possible that you might not even know what you are going into. Say, okay, oh, I'm interested in hacking. It sounds very nice. Everyone says, oh, I'm interested in hacking, and then you go into it, and when you encounter a few challenges, you see that, oh, I don't think I'm passionate about this, right? You can then go into something else. An example is data privacy, which is something which is what we'll be talking about in the next session. And when you have been able to determine that you want to do this, then you go for, okay, let me bring up the slide again. um okay, so for technical skills, including audit skills, right, you can leverage on ISACA. So ISACA is a cybersecurity professional body. I can tell you that because I'm an active member, and so many of my mentors are active members on ISACA. Is globally recognized. They have a vast range of resources. Let me even say this: if you want to learn audit, there's what we call CISA, CISA, Certified Information Security Auditor. If you take that course, I can tell you that you will become a very good auditor. And then there are more, technical hands-on skills or roles that you can say you want to go into. Say hacking, which you can, if it's hacking you're interested in, then you look at Certified Ethical Hacker, CEH. If it's, say, cloud security you want to go into, then you have to consider what vendor. You have vendors like Amazon, Google, Amazon, Google, Oracle, right? And you look at the security costs they have. Let me see what other programs. So if you want to be a security analyst, which is also a hands-on role, CompTIA, there is a body called CompTIA. It's just like a professional body, just like ISACA and the others. CompTIA has certifications that can help you become a security analyst, where, as a security analyst, you get to do more technical things. So CompTIA, for example, has what we call the CISA Plus. But if you are just coming into the field, right, and you want to be a security analyst, it's recommended, not compulsory, it's recommended that you start with Security Plus, CompTIA Security Plus. Once you do CompTIA Security Plus, you can then say, okay, if it's hacking you want to go into, then you go to CEH, right, Certified Ethical Hacker. You will get trained, and there are so many. In fact, I'm aware that in recent times, Techhaven has been taking some of those technical courses, right, and so you can, when you also do if you're not interested in CH, you want to be more on the analyst side, security analyst side, you do CISA Plus. Is also owned by CompTIA, right? Let me see, what other role could one be interested in if you are looking at application security, right? That one, I think there are okay, yeah, there is, but the one I know is actually quite difficult. It might not be for someone just coming in, but I know other resources that will be vital if you want to go down that path. But I can say, we can connect, on a personal level, and I'll give you all that guide. We can all, discuss more about it. But have I been able to answer your question?
Excellently. Yes, you are. So I will connect with you. Thank you.
All right. Thank
Yeah.
you. So any other questions? Okay. Hi. Oh, okay.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, yes. Hi. Eniola.
All right, yeah. So, thank you so much for the webinar. So much insights on this. So, my question is basically, I'm transitioning from, I'm actually transitioning. I'm a total designer, but I have a little desire to actually understand the space of cybersecurity and all of that, Internet of all things and all of that. And yeah, so I'm actually doing it for a purpose, not really like I want to really like go into the field and get a job like that. But it's not that getting a job around it. But the main purpose I'm doing this is that okay, I've seen cybersecurity to be a tech field that has the vulnerability of studying forging education, like taking a master's degree in all of that, and the potential it has something like that. So I think that's one of the reasons I'm trying to actually look at cybersecurity. I mean, everyone has different reasons they do things. I mean, some people is money, some people is desire. So I don't say this is the reason why I'm trying to think of cybersecurity. I just feel it's one way to then put it in the normal way, jackpot. So that was it. So just that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's
yeah, so I'm seeing cybersecurity as that way. It has this potential, and just little bit in the field, and you can actually do it yourself to the very good, position yourself well, and you actually be open to more opportunities. And also, this is my main reason. I don't know if you have any advice, any opinion, or an idea of what I'm trying to say, something like that.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Eniola. So what I would advise, right, is that I'm glad you have that interest and you seem very passionate, to go into the field. I would encourage you, and I'll be very factual with you. You can't go wrong, if you decide to move to cybersecurity. And I can tell you for a fact that I know people who, came from so many backgrounds, right? You don't need to, all you just need to have is that passion, that, you need to be passionate. And if you are passionate about it, there are so many resources, there are so many people that can guide you through your journey to becoming, to specialize in whatever area you want to specialize in. I think I also saw a question about okay, I'll address that afterwards. I would say you could consider, depending on what you are interested in. If you have a background in product design or product development, I would say you can have a look. You can just do a preliminary research on application security. Some people find it very interesting. Is an area that I have some knowledge on, but I would also even love to be engaged more in that area. And I think you can, just do a few minor research, on application security. What does it entail? If you do that and you don't really like it, I know one field that a lot of people would like is that certified is being an ethical hacker, right? Because it just gives you that challenge that you can break into things, although truly you have to do it the right way. So you could consider application security. You could consider ethical hacking. There are so many resources, to go into it. There are so many people. Even us at Techhaven, we can give you that guidance. So yeah, that's what I would advise. Yeah, I would say you should keep it up. Just be passionate, maintain your drive and interest, and you would excel at it.
Thank
Have
you so
I
much.
have I been able to answer your question?
Yeah, yes, thank you so much.
You're welcome. So okay, does one need to have programming skills? No, you don't need to have programming skills, to excel as a consultant, not at all. You, depending on what you want to specialize in, you could even say, if you're going into cloud, because cloud security is, you know, a very, very lucrative field. There's high demand, you know, for it right now. Amongst the other roles in cybersecurity, you could just quickly, you know, do some cloud computing training. There's this AWS, you know, there's the AWS fundamental, there's the Azure fundamental, AWS CCP, which is Certified Cloud Practitioner. That will give you the foundational knowledge of cloud computing and how it works. And as soon as you are done with AWS CCP, or say Azure security, right? Depending on what platform you want to specialize in, or the others, you can then go into the security part of it, and you would make, if you are in the field for the money, you will make money. If you are in it to, you know, just make impact in the industry, you will definitely do that. So yeah, you don't need to have, you know, that specific set of skills. There are things you can always acquire, you know, and I will encourage all of us to maintain that mindset, you know, that okay, I think what I would just encourage is, you should ask questions like, what do I need to do, right? Once all you that is the key question, because, you know, at a point too, you know, I was at that level, and what do I need to do to become a certified an ethical hacker? You know, what do I need to do to become an application security specialist? What do I need to do to become a cyber risk specialist? And if you ask the right questions and you ask the right people, they will give you that roadmap, and you'll just have to be consistent on that path, and you will try. Have I been able to answer all our questions?
Yeah, I guess so. I think we can move on, and then if there's any other question at the end of the class, we will definitely ask, so that we can be able to cover today's session.
Yeah. So we're going into the next session now, which is what we call it's called data privacy audit, or data privacy compliance assessment. And I would, you know, try to break it down, you know, as much as possible, you know, for us to understand and make it practical, because these are things, you know, in the real world that we can relate to, you and I. Along the line, I'll use maybe a case study of popular companies we know, and you know, some regulations that maybe some of us have heard about. Now, data privacy. Data privacy is an aspect of data security concerned with, you know, proper handling of data, consent, notice, and regulatory obligations. Essentially, data privacy is just, you know, when you, okay, so let's use individuals like you and I, right? We all have our personal data. Our personal data refers to, you know, your first name, your last name, you know, your date of birth, your all those data that are peculiar to you as an individual. That's your personal data. You know, data that can be used to identify you is your personal data. Data privacy is the field that ensures that your personal data, you know, is secured, you know, protected, not misused, and thereby reducing, you know, the risk or exposure of identity theft, fraud, you know, damage, you know, and things like that. That is essentially what data privacy is about. It protects the interest of individuals like you and I. So let me be more practical. Say you have, when you want to sign up on Facebook, or let's even say for those of us who use Android phones, or both Android and, you know, Apple phones, right? When you get your phone, they try to get you to, you know, enter your details. If it's an Android phone, then you have to create a Google account, you know, because every other function on your Android phone is linked to your Google account. It will make you give us your name, your first name, your last name, your email address, your phone number, your what do you call it? Your phone number, your house address sometimes, and they take all that data from you. Now, data privacy is the field that ensures that when they take that data from you, when they obtain your data, they protect it, right? And they handle it the way it should be handled in order to minimize your exposure, Now, what are the exposures we are talking about? If one of the high risk exposure you have as regards personal data is the risk of identity theft. Is also the risk of discrimination and mistreatment. Let me give more context to discrimination. Okay, I'll elaborate more on that on the next session slide actually. Yeah, so that's just an overview of data privacy. Now let's look at data privacy terminologies. The reason I put this here is because as we go deeper into data privacy, you will be using these terminologies, and we'll have to be familiar with them, right? So a data subject is the individual who owns the personal data, and that is you and I. So when I just get my my new Android phone and I try to just use it, and they say create your Google account, and I start entering all my details, that personal data belongs to me. I am the data subject. That is essentially who a data subject. So a data subject can be you or I. Whoever is providing that whoever owns the personal data is the data subject. And then personal data. Personal data, as I mentioned, is any piece of information that can be used to identify you. So your name is the personal data. Your social security number, your ID, right? Your ID number, whatever ID card you have, if there's an ID on it that can be used to identify you as an individual, is classified as it qualifies, as a personal data. Your phone number, your email address, your CCTV footage. So I know this is something that most of us are not, or some of us are not often aware of. When you walk into a premise, when you come on a premises that has CCTV camera or CCTV cameras installed, and they are recording you, that they have your personal data, and they are liable, right? They are liable to, and they are obligated to ensure that that's your personal information that they have captured with the CCTV camera, with the cameras, is secure. It is not it's secure and confidential. Also, another example of personal data is voice data, right? So if you notice, when as we're on this Zoom session and we started recording, we're all notified that this meeting is being recorded, and that is because even your voice data is still qualified or classified as a personal data. Also, IP address. Your IP address, the IP address of your system, can still be used to identify you. So IP address is actually also qualifies as a personal data. And so I hope we understand that. The next thing is sensitive data. Sensitive data is a subset of personal data. Subset just means, a category of personal data. An example of sensitive data is your, let's call it your sexual orientation, right? Your sexual orientation is your personal data, and is a sensitive data, and we'll explain you. I think I will explain why it's sensitive. Another example is your ethnic origin or your racial origin, right? Is also a sensitive data. What race are you? Are you African? Are you Asian? That's considered a sensitive data. I will explain why it's considered a sensitive data. Your political opinions. So, everybody has, who they feel when it comes to politics, or I feel this candidate is, better, this candidate can do this, and that's your political opinion. It's still classified or categorized as a sensitive data. Your religious or philosophical beliefs is sensitive data. Trade union membership is sensitive data. Your biometric data is sensitive data, right? And now, why is it sensitive? The reason it's called sensitive data is because if this information about you is disclosed, or if the information about a data subject, which is you and I, right, whoever owns the data, is disclosed, that person can actually suffer, discrimination, which is something we are well aware about, right? So if just because my philosophical beliefs or my religious beliefs, does not align with other people, then I might actually get to, encounter discrimination, maltreatment, in the office, and that's why, or wherever environment we find ourselves, and that is why it's classified as sensitive data. The next thing is data controller. So data controller is the entity that, now when I say entity, I mean the business. So the business or the company that obtained your data. A classical example is when you took your phone, you try to use your new mobile phone, you got your Apple phone, and when you try to use some of the features, they said, what's your Apple ID, right? What's your Apple account? And you had to create the Apple account. Apple is the data controller. When you try to sign up on Google and Google said, give us all your details, all your personal details, Google is the data controller. So it's the entity, essentially, it's the entity that obtains, the personal data. They determine the purpose for which your data will be utilized and is responsible for securing that data. They are also liable. They are responsible, they are accountable, and they are liable if anything happens to your data. I would give us more context to why all of this is highly regulated, why your personal data is so important. Let me use Facebook also as an example, right? So Facebook has all our data. I think it might be one of the companies, either Facebook or Google, that has, majority of the world's population data. When they obtain that data from us, we are the data subjects because we own the data. As in, as an individual, you are the data subject. The data controller is whoever obtained the data. Now they are accountable. So if Facebook takes your data as an individual and then starts using it for marketing purpose, they start selling your data to other companies, and then you start getting targeted advertisements on your phone. Anytime you use Google to search for maybe a wristwatch, then all of a sudden you start seeing, adverts on your phone everywhere. If you open your Yahoo Mail or this, you start seeing that. It shows that your personal data, which in this case is called your cookie activity, right, is being tracked, and someone is actually selling your or utilizing your data for marketing purposes. I'm sure we can all relate to that, especially most of us who use Android phones, right? Yeah, so that's who a data controller is. Now, the second thing is a data processor, which I'm sure when we are able to distinguish these terminologies, we would understand the next section of the presentation. Data processor is the entity or the business that receives, sorry, not receives, that process, that on behalf of the data controller, they store, they process, or provide security services. A good example is, let's say Facebook. Facebook asked you to sign up, and when you entered all that your information, they then saved your information in the cloud. So let's assume Facebook has connections to Amazon, right? All Facebook's information, all Facebook's data is stored on Amazon Cloud or Google Cloud or Oracle Cloud. Oracle or Amazon now become the data processor because they are executing this service on behalf of the person that collected that data. Google was the one that collected your data, and when they collected it, they, instead of storing it maybe on their premise, they decided to just store it in the cloud. Google was then using, say they were using Amazon, just hypothetically speaking, right? The third party that they gave your information to becomes the data processor. Ultimately, the person that is responsible, accountable, and liable for anything that happens to your personal data and can be sued is the data controller. If you signed up on Facebook and all the information you provided on Facebook, all of a sudden you start seeing that same set of information on another platform that you have absolutely no business with, that means Facebook is liable, they are accountable, and they can actually, if they violated your rights, they would face the penalty for that. And so these are the different terminologies would be utilizing along the way. Now, in the context of data privacy audit or data privacy compliance assessment, you need to, as I mentioned earlier, there has to be a framework, a standard, or a regulation that you are auditing against. A good example is the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation. This is a privacy regulation, and this regulation was actually the first, if I'm not mistaken, it was the first privacy regulation, let's not say global, but it was globally recognized, right? Because it was the first, and it was established on May 25, 2018. What they did was they set out mandates that any business who obtains individuals' data in Europe must meet. So if all European citizens that use Facebook or use Google or use Amazon or use any of those platforms, as long as you are a business that collects their citizens' data, any citizen in Europe or anybody who resides in Europe, then you are subject to all the requirements of GDPR. And if you do not comply or you're in violation of the regulation, you will face the penalty of this is the penalty, the stipulated penalty. That business will face 4% of their global revenue, or £20 million. Let me give a more illustrative example. So let's use airlines. A popular airline, say British Airways, British airline, right? Because airlines have presence globally, they operate everywhere, they have offices everywhere in the world. So if they have, say, they also operate in Canada, where I am currently, if they obtain Canadian citizens' information, they are subject to the privacy regulation in Canada, just because they are obtaining Canadian citizens information. And if they are in violation of that regulation, there are penalties for it. So that's essentially, the concept of privacy regulations. And then when you are conducting your data privacy audits as an auditor or security auditor or a privacy auditor, what you are to do is then take that regulation, look at all the requirements, all the clauses, all the requirements in that regulation, and then assess if the client has met those criteria, met the requirements. And then you even determine the level, the extent to which they met it. So there are instances where, okay, they are doing it, but they implemented or they complied with that requirement, but they are not completely compliant. Then you flag it, right? So that's what a data privacy audit or that's an overview of data privacy audit or data privacy compliance. That's what you do. And now in the context of data privacy, the key thing we need to look at is data privacy governance. Governance. So in the context of governance risk, let me just give you a high level overview of what governance is. So in cybersecurity, a lot you'll be hearing things like security governance, you'll be hearing things like privacy governance, you hear things like risk governance. Essentially, what governance does is just is a high level, is a sort of, let me call it a strategic mode of defining or establishing the requirements that are necessary for compliance with the defined criteria. I'm thinking of the best way to illustrate it to us. So when we talk, when we talk about security governance, you need, for any business organization to have a very good security posture, security program, it is very essential that they have security governance. And this security governance is a way to establish and define and control security in that organization. Now, when we talk of privacy governance, it has to do with the measures to oversee, you establish oversight, for you establish or you define oversight for privacy, data privacy in that organization. As I mentioned, all these regulations, right, they have penalties for non-compliance. So as a business, let's use British Airways, the previous example we used. If you run your operations globally and then in a particular country like Europe, where all the passengers who boarded your flight, you took all their information, and then somehow maybe there was a data breach, or you just did not comply with all the requirements of the GDPR, which was the regulation, in that area where your business is operating, you are subject to the penalty. And so businesses take privacy very seriously. And the first step to, establishing a very strong privacy program in your business is to have data privacy governance. Now, what are the things we look at in data privacy governance? These are things you look at in audits, and these are also things that the business is also looking to do. So when the business engages you as a consultant they can engage you to come and audit them, that please, we are supposed to file our report to GDPR, or say okay, let me come back here. So for Ccpa, California Consumer Privacy Act. So this is a very popular law in North America, right? In US, even in Canada. Their requirements are also they are derived from the GDPR. It's just they have slight variations in them, right? All of these, except the last two, these three are privacy regulations. They are very similar, right? It's just they might add one or two or take away one or two requirements, just slight differences, but they all have the same principle, the same concept, which is what we are looking at right now. In order to, the business can engage you as a consultant and say, okay, we need you to guide us through compliance with Ccpa or GDPR. We want you to set us up so we are compliant. We even want you to, help us do you want you to set us up, to establish all that needs to be in place. We have the budget for it, because if you don't set aside budgets to handle it, then you're going to pay 4% of your GDP that year, or you pay 20 million pounds, or in fact, it will even be worse than that. So you need to set aside, the business has to set aside budget. They need to engage your services as a privacy consultant, as a privacy specialist. You look at these areas. The business has to have these areas, which is what we call data privacy governance. The first thing is personal data asset inventory. Now, what this means is, let's use, which company can I use? Okay, let's use Apple. So Apple, wants to establish a data privacy governance, to ensure that their privacy program is running the way it should be, so that they will always be compliant and they will not, lose money due to penalties. They need to, first of all, ensure that they know all the personal data that they collect. A classical example, which we can all relate to, is at our place of work. They actually collect various kinds of data. Some businesses are not aware of that, and if they don't, go through this process, of engaging, a privacy specialist, they might not know, unless it's indicated in their report, their compliance report. The business has to know every point at which they collect personal data. So when candidates apply for jobs, what happens? You have a portal where candidates upload their resume. That resume contains their personal data, their names, their addresses, their phone numbers, things that can be used to identify them, considered as personal data. When you obtained all your recruitment candidates' data and you started screening them, before you eventually selected some of them as successful employees, did you take note of it, that is a collection point for personal data? 1. 2, when you for HR now, when you screened out the successful candidates and you selected a subset as employees, you ask them to give you all their information, so you have it on record that, okay, you work with us, right? That is also a collection point for personal data. Now, on your premises, you have CCTV cameras installed. And as I mentioned, CCTV footage, you know, showing image of people is also classified as personal data. That is also a data collection point. You know, some businesses are not aware of that until they engage the services of, you know, a privacy consultant. The fourth thing is voice data. Some businesses have call centers, you know, where you can easily, you know, telecoms, whatever business, even, you know, the airline industry that I mentioned, they all have call centers where I'm sure Zoom should also, Zoom, which we are using, should also have concept call centers. When you call them, you know, they will tell you, hi, you know, this call may be recorded or monitored for quality assurance purposes, right? That is a data collection point. The business also engages the services of third party. It could be an IT service provider. It could be whatever service that third party is providing. When they entered into contractual agreement with that business, they took down all the details of the business, right? Now, meaning, like, of course, they will have specifics on record, like, okay, who is maybe the MD or the board or whoever, the key, the liaison on that client side. They take down that information. That is also a data collection point. Now, this is what your personal data asset inventory does for you. It helps you identify and keep track of all the data collection points. When you collect people's data, you need to have a way of keeping track of it. Otherwise, you will end up, you know, collecting so much data than you need, one, and then you have measures in place to protect, which is the, you know, the key thing in data privacy. And that means if you don't have a personal data asset inventory, okay, the concept is, which is also a concept in risk management, not just privacy, is that if you want to protect, and cybersecurity as a whole, if you want to protect your data, the first thing, protect your data or an asset, you need to identify that asset. If we collect 7 categories of personal data, we collect employees data, we collect third party data, we collect recruitment candidates data, we collect this. Out of 10 of them, we are only aware that is 8 we collected, that we are collecting. The other 2 we are not even aware. That means, you know, we can conclude that you are not even protecting them, because you can only protect what you know. The business has to have a data asset inventory. Data asset inventory means, you know, as I mentioned, there are different categories of data: voice data, employee data, recruitment data, recruitment candidates data, what have you. You have this, and that is that. The next one is data protection policy. This is very important. Policies usually are governance documents. So if you are talking of cyber risk, risk management, when you say risk policy, that is a governance, that's a risk governance document. When you say security policy, that's a security governance document. When you say privacy policy, or, you know, in this case, data protection policy, these words are used interchangeably. So when you say privacy policy, you are talking of a governance document. And as I mentioned, that is what will help you, you know, that's what will help you establish, you know, you define your expectations, your requirements for how that thing should run, how that program should run. So the business should have, you know, establish a policy detailing all privacy requirements. The third one is a data protection officer. In this case, they need to appoint an individual responsible for data privacy. It is very important. And that is because by intuition, if you don't appoint someone that is responsible for that duty, then nobody is responsible for it, right? If everybody is responsible for it, nobody is responsible for it. So if you want to really, you know, have a solid privacy program, privacy practice, privacy activity, then you need to appoint someone responsible for it. I would explain something from an audit perspective. You know, we mentioned audit skills. I'll give you things that the auditor will look at. In fact, what I'm explaining to you are things that the auditor will look out for, and you can start writing your report. If I'm conducting the data privacy audit, I ask, where's your data asset inventory? They don't have it. Okay, I note it down. Do you have a data protection policy? They don't have it. That is that has even close the engagement, because if you don't have a data protection or data privacy policy, then it means you are not even taking privacy seriously, right? So the next thing is data privacy impact assessment. Data privacy impact assessment is like, let's call it a risk assessment for data. Let me give more context. So when Google decided to start collecting your information, that okay, or Facebook, anybody that must use this app will have their information, right? When they started collecting that data, there are risks involved, and one of the risks is what we call compliance risk. Because the moment they chose to collect people's data, they have become subject to the regulation. They have become they are under that mandate, that regulatory mandate, to comply with the privacy requirements. So GDPR said all businesses that collect data must protect the data, must do this, must do that, must do this, must do that. You are subject to it. And so before you even decide as a business, before you decide to start collecting personal data, you need to conduct PIA, privacy impact assessment. And that means, okay, this data we are collecting, what do we really need it? What do we really need it for? How are we going to store it? How are we going to use it? Do we have the finances in place to, do we have the budget in place to finance, securing of that data? How long are we going to secure this data for? So let me use an airline. An airline, started its business, and they started collecting all passengers on the plane. They started collecting their, storing their information. And of course, there are passengers who just bought that flight once and never use it again, right? You have already put yourself in, as a business, you have put yourself in that position now. You are in a way, I would say, you are exposed to the risk of, you are exposed to compliance risk, and you know the penalty for that. It means 4% of your revenue, your global revenue. So all your offices all over the world, they will total that and take 4% from you for not complying with whatever regulation you were in violation of. I'm talking about privacy regulation now. So it's important that you conduct data privacy impact assessment. You look at the risk. What risk are we exposing ourselves to? Do we have the measures in place? Is it even important that we take this data? How long are we keeping it for? Because as long as you have that data in your possession, you are liable, you are accountable and responsible for it. Data breach incident management. This is actually a generic cybersecurity measure, right? So this means that whenever there's a data breach, do you have incident management procedures in place? So the business has to establish procedures for data breach incident. If they don't have it, then you know that these guys, they are not compliant, they are not taking it seriously, and the regulatory body can decide how they engage the business. The next thing is capacity building and awareness program. This if you are able to, as an auditor, if you're able to see this, if they can give you evidence of this, then you know that, okay, to an extent, these guys take this thing seriously. Oh, they have a data protection policy. Oh, they conduct capacity building and awareness program. What does this mean? It means that, okay, from time to time, they do privacy and security training for all their staff, their third party, the staff on the third party side, right? That's their suppliers or, sub-service providers. They also do privacy for their data. They do privacy and security training for their data privacy officer. So I'm sure most of us will notice or will observe that our organizations, every year we have to do privacy and security training. They will teach you, what's personal data, what's this. You have to keep your information secure. If you are working from home, whenever you are not using your laptop, you close it. These are all privacy and security requirements. And so if you can see that the organization, they have an awareness program, they have training program and all of that, for their staff, as well as their whoever they appointed as the protection officer, then you know that, okay, to an extent, these guys take it seriously. Now, okay, yeah, I think I've just covered that. So in your audits, you just look at all these areas. Does the business have this? If they don't, then it speaks volume about what the environment is, and you can start, writing your say your report, your your recommendation. Now, I mentioned that we'll be using the GDPR as a case study. There are other privacy frameworks. There's the CCPA, there's the California Consumer Privacy Act, there's the HIPAA, Health Insurance Portability Act, right? GDPR was the first privacy regulation, and I think it's still the most tedious to comply with. It's more robust, it is more mature because it started early. So we'll just use this regulation as a case study, and would pick any random hypothetical business to for training purposes. Now we're looking at the GDPR principles. So this regulation, the General Data Protection Regulation, has principles, and this means that for you to comply with the GDPR, for us to say you are compliant, you have to meet all these principles, you have to meet all these requirements. The first one is lawful processing. Now, this principle stipulates that data must be collected based on lawful and genuine purpose by the data controller. Remember, the data controller is the business that decided to start taking, collecting people's data. Facebook, Google, Delta Airlines, your business, my business. The moment we decided to start taking people's data, that is the data controller. Now, the principle stipulates that when the justification for collecting that data must be aligned with one of these bases. Okay, yes, one of these bases here. The legal basis for processing data, according to GDPR anyway, includes consent. This is very imperative. When you hear privacy, this is what you need to. This is the most important thing. Did you obtain consent from the data subject? Before Google, okay, no, let's in this instance, let's not use Google. Let's use websites. You notice when you visit a website for the very first time, this banner pops up saying accept cookies, right? And if you read, most times we don't even take time to read it because we just want, to access the information and be off. But if you take a closer look at that information, they will tell you that this website tracks, or this website would like to track your web activity or web cookies, and they will tell you, please click accept. By clicking accept, you agree to our privacy policy. We'll get to that shortly. When you click accept, you have provided consent. Now, in the case of say, yes, so a good example is what I just used. When you visit a website for the first time, they give you that. Sometimes it's over the phone. When you make a phone call, you see, they will tell you, rather, they tell you this call will be monitored for quality assurance purposes. By remaining on the call, you agree to our privacy policy. Please refer to our privacy policy on www.deltaairlines.com. Once you proceed, once you do not cut the call, then you are provided consent. This Zoom meeting that we are on, the moment we started recording, it informed us of that. It is essential. That is why, it's because of this privacy. It's a big deal, right? And I think maybe at the end of the session, when we start discussing, when we exchange information out, I can give you my own perception of why these things, why they are very important, right? Not textbook knowledge, but my own understanding of what will happen if these things were not in place. The next thing is performance of contract. This is another basis, right? So the data is required to perform. This basis means the data is required to perform a contract with the data subject. So as an employee, when you applied as a candidate, you applied for recruitment and they shortlisted you for your job, the HR asked you for your details. Give us your name, where you live, your bank address. We are enrolling you on health insurance and all of that. That information, what they actually needed it to perform the contract they have with you because you're in their employment. So if it's so as they said, the data must be collected based on one of these requirements here. So it could be consent. Just because you gave us consent, we are collecting the data. Just because we are in, we need it to perform our contract with you, we will take it. Legitimate interest. So when you provide your data to Instagram or Facebook or any social media, social networking site, I think it is implied that you gave them that data based on legitimate interest, meaning you expected them, you agreed, you want to connect, you want to network with people, and they need to have that information of you on their data, in their database, for the application to work, for the social media site to work. So I think legitimate interest is falls in that category. Now, vital interest is this means is necessary for legal obligation, such as information security, employment, or consumer transaction law. That's what the vital interest talks about. And now we look at the legal requirement. In the context of legal requirements, say, okay, let's use U.S. Department of State, right? They need to have, or whatever government likes to have information on its citizens, right? And so if they obtain that data, it falls within this, on this base. This is the basis for that. Public interest. Just a second. Public interest, the processing activity that will occur by a government entity or an organization acting on behalf of the government entity. So essentially, when a business collects data as an auditor, you need to look, and if you're auditing against the GDPR framework, this is what you need to determine. Okay, was this data you're collecting, is it lawful? What determines if it's lawful? Is it in any of this category? Did you obtain consent? Is it required for this? If you cannot identify any of these, you put it in your report. And if the client has a contrary opinion, then they show you where it's documented. You say, okay, can you show me your privacy policy? We'll have, I think in the next section, we'll have a look at, what the privacy policy should contain. Can you show me your privacy policy? I need to see where you stated it, that the reason you are collecting people's web activity, right? You are tracking their web activities. Okay, these are the kind of sites this person visits. And you take that cookie, it's called web cookies. You store that information, right? Can you tell me which of these bases it is used for? If they will always try to, usually the client always just wants you to give them, oh yes, that they are compliant, even if they are not. If they cannot give you that substantial evidence based on your professional approach to audit, as I mentioned, which is the professional skepticism, you document you're finding that we have not been able to receive evidence to show that this data was collected based on this. Of course, they won't like that, but it's just that's you couldn't find any evidence to back it up. Or you could say, okay, to an extent they were compliant with that, but there's still room for improvement. Then you now make your recommendation. So you could, sometimes we use, as auditors, we use color codes. Red means not compliant at all. Yellow means partially, right? But there's room for improvement. Green means compliant. So another key thing of the GDPR is the privacy policy. Now, the privacy policy I mentioned is a document. Anytime you hear policy, that's a governance document. If it's an IT policy, it's an IT governance policy, governance document. If it's security policy, it's a security governance document. That document is essentially what you use to define and establish your requirements for that program. Privacy policy defines how data is to be collected, managed, processed or retained within the organization. The policy document must contain clauses that addresses all requirements of the privacy regulation. So GDPR, if as an auditor you're auditing against GDPR, and GDPR has said, let me take it back. Yes, so GDPR has said all of these. When they collect data, it must be lawful. They must clearly communicate the rights of the data subject. I will explain that in detail. They must securely store the data, right? The controller is accountable. the data must be confidential, and they must ensure it's the integrity is maintained. When that framework has said all of those things, you need to see their privacy policy, and you need to see what they define there. Okay, in your policy. Okay, so these are key elements of a privacy policy. So this is just an example of things you need to see, right? If you see these things, then okay, these guys are, they have a very good privacy policy. They talk about lawful processing of data. So for every category of data they collect, they have identified why they are collecting it. When they decide to collect recruitment candidates data and store it, they have identified that they needed it for maybe performance of contract or vital interest. When they decided to store your all the records of their employees, they have identified which of those bases it is, and it's defined in, or is detailed in the document. When you have a look at okay, also, which is something we will look at in the next section, transfer of personal data abroad, right? This is a major issue in the context of privacy. Europe has the GDPR regulation, and they have said any organization that is doing business in its country and are collecting all their citizens' data or residents' data must comply with this. But then the organization takes all that data and is now transferring it to another country. Okay, for education purposes, I would also use this. I'll make this state this. So in the context of privacy, I think globally there are countries that are they say they are notorious for violating privacy. There's no such thing as privacy. Okay, I think I will hold back some of those countries, but I'm sure we are aware of some of them, right? There's no such thing as privacy. Any business that does any organization that does business in that country, the government can say, can you give us all the data you have, on all your citizens, all the personal data, personal information you have obtained. So those countries are notorious, right? And so transfer of personal data is a big deal. What country are you transferring this data to? The next one is principle of data minimization. Okay, so as the lawful, this means the data you are collecting, do you okay, how the principle of data minimization refers to reducing the data you collect. Remember I told you about the PIA, the privacy impact assessment. Do we really need this data? That's where you ask all those questions. Why do we need it? Is it compulsory? Okay, how long are we keeping it for? Because we shouldn't have that kind of liability, which exposes us to compliance risk. We don't want that kind of thing on our hands. Principle of data minimization, that's what this refers to. This is if you see that in the policy, in the company's policy, that okay, we are not going to collect more than what we need, fantastic. There's a purpose limitation, principle of purpose limitation. Anyway, so if these are key elements of a privacy policy, and if you can see this, then to a great extent they are compliant. The next thing you need to look at is data security, this is where the technical skill that we talked about really comes to play. So if you look at all the things you have been doing in your data privacy engagement, you have just been reviewing policies, reviewing their processes. Okay, it meets this, it doesn't meet this. Now you need technical skills to review or to assess the adequacy of their security controls. First thing you need to see, which is basically what you see everywhere in any serious business, right, that handles not just personal data, all kinds of data, financial data, and whatever, intellectual property data, they need to have rule-based access control. Rule-based access control means for access to any information, rights should be granted. So if I don't have a need for it, or if my rule, right, if my right does not permit it, then I cannot have access to that information. That is role-based access control, and this is something we are very conversant with. Everybody who has worked with any organization you work in, they always ensure they have role-based access controls in place. They have physical access controls in place, right? There are aspects of the so in the context of the audit you are conducting, when you see that once you have checked this, that okay, they are compliant with this, the next thing is physical access controls. So you ask them, the systems that store and process all this personal data, where are they? Where is your data center? Where is your IT room, right? And they will tell you, oh, they can tell you we don't store all our data on premise. We store it in the cloud. And that actually gives you more work to do because there are so many considerations in that area that I think we'll also look at that. The next one is network security controls. Okay, so for their network infrastructure, do you have things like firewall? So firewall help you, restrict access to the network, because the network is no longer like a physical, is no longer a physical space. Is a digital space, right? But you still need to have firewalls to restrict access on the network segregation, use of DMZs, right? All of these are technical terminologies, right? And so this is where you need that technical expertise, to assess, do they have a SIM solution? What a SIM solution does is, as an auditor, this is your friend. The SIM solution is your friend, right? Because what a SIM solution does is it collects log data, and it correlates them, correlation and aggregation, and helps you detect events in real time, or potential events, or threat of events in real time. That is what a SIM solution does. But this is more technical, right? And I don't want to bog us down with this because we have other things to cover. The next one is network access control. Yeah, network access control, how you restrict access. Just as we said, rule-based access control ensures that only authorized persons have access to that data, to that information. Now, in the context of personal data, if everybody in the organization has access to if Google, let's use Google as an example, because you created an account with Google, every staff in Google that works in Google can now access your data. They don't have role-based access control. Is a major exception. It's a major exception. So that's for network security, right? The next one is DLPs and IDPS. DLPs means data loss prevention. So organizations have, they utilize the DLP solutions to prevent. We call it data exfiltration. So in your place of work, there might be confidential data that you are not supposed to take out of office. It has to remain within the office system. So staff find a way to either use email or USB flash to copy that information out there, or they email it to themselves or to their friend or whatever. DLP solutions help you restrict that and monitors that. IDPS, intrusion detection and prevention systems, are controls that we use to, either detect or prevent security breach. And that, so in the in the document where we talked about data breach incident management, right? You'll be seeing, they'll be making references to this at a higher level, right? They might not tell you what solution they are using, but they will stipulate that, okay, as part of our data breach incident management or security management policy, we must have this solution. We must have a solution that correlates log data and helps us determine, if an incident is about to occur, a security breach is about to occur, or is in progress already. This solution must help us. The DLP must help us prevent data exfiltration, so that our confidential data, our client information, will not be on the internet, and that will lead to reputational damage. When we do cyber risk, we'll look at the effect of some of these things. If they are not working, what happens to your business? It could be catastrophic, right? So all these tech giants we see, Twitter, Facebook, and all of that, they invest thousands of money. They invest, that's say thousands, millions of dollars to ensure, everything is the way it should be. And that is why, we always encourage people to go into cybersecurity, because it's a very lucrative field, you know. So the next thing is access reviews, provisioning and termination. This is very important. Whenever you hire new staff, this is the process, you put them through. On the onboarding, you give them email accounts. Okay, here is your official email. Here is your username and password. Make sure you change it every 60 or 90 days. So, and they make sure when they give you those accounts, they give you the appropriate. So if your role is, maybe you have a role that has privileged access or rights to certain information or, systems, they give you that. And if it's below that, they make sure it's appropriate. That falls under access provisioning. And then termination, when they fire, they terminate their staff, they implement access termination measures or processes or tasks. Now, so these are things you need to look out. I'm just giving, a summary of things you need to look at. There might be one or two that might not be here. There is an approach to that, so you don't so you leave no stone unturned. But essentially, any organization that has all of this in place, I can tell you to a high degree, they have, I can say they have done their due diligence, right? The next thing is antivirus management. Of course, they deploy, they implement, they install antivirus solutions on all their systems. Encryption for data in transit and data at rest. This is actually a technical concept. Is a concept, but let me explain. So encryption. So when you talk about data in transit, it just means, for example, you go to www.amazon.com and you want to shop, right? They always tell you to look at if it's HTTP or HTTPS in the web link up there in the web link. So if it's HTTPS, that means that your data is actually secure. Now, data in transit means, because at the point where on Amazon you click your checkout and you enter your details, your card details, or even your personal details, right? Any information you enter and you click send, or you click pay or whatever, if that web link doesn't show you HTTP with an S at the back, that means that connection is not secure and it's exposed or vulnerable to, you could call it man in the middle attack. It's called man in the middle attack, but it's vulnerable to someone eavesdropping on your communication and stealing your card details. So all those your card details that you entered, anybody, if the website is not secure, it can be, what do you call it? Your information can be stolen, your identity, your social insurance number, your social security number, your credit card information, and other, vital information can be stolen. So you need to see. So even as an auditor, I just say, okay, look, what application do you use to store and process all these people's data? They'll tell you, we store it on so. Can I see the front end of the application? If you don't see HTTPS, right? Or you look at the protocol in their settings and you see that this thing is running an insecure protocol, then you flag it. And so for data at rest, they also encrypt data at rest. Data at rest simply means, the data that is stored on the system physically, right? So if you destroy the hard drives, that data is gone, So data at rest, and this concept mandates, or it requires that you encrypt that data, because anybody can break into your facility and steal your hard drives, right? Facebook now, no matter how secure their facility is, if any advanced threat actor wants to gain some sort of information, they can attack their facility and steal those hard drives. And if the hard drive is not encrypted, they are going to they'll pay the penalty. And so VPN, of course, most of us work remotely, so this is also a technical control, right? You know how to connect to your office network. If you don't use a VPN, you have rendered the network. In fact, with their what do you call it? With the measures in place, you cannot connect your remote device, your laptop, your laptop that you're using to work from home, to your office network without a VPN. This helps you. Okay, a high level description of this is it creates an encrypted tunnel, right, for communications between your system and your office network. So it is not, so that connection or that session is not vulnerable to a cyber attack. And then endpoint protection. So all these, your laptops, your probably desktops in the office, right? They have solutions in place to protect them. That is data security. So you see, this is a lot of work. When we always get to this part, we do a lot of work, but this is where your technical expertise comes to play. Sometimes you don't need to do too much because there are indicators you see. Of course, you still have to obtain that evidence, but the indicators you see, and okay, it seems these people have something in place, like the HTTP and HTTPS. That's if you don't see HTTP, if you don't see an S at the back, which stands for secure, then okay, you know. And so third-party processing is another principle of GDPR that the entity must comply with, right? This is also a criteria you look at. So do they transfer that data to a third party? Google obtained your data, and then they transfer the data to, okay, let's not use Google this time. Let's use Delta Airlines. When you entered all your information on Delta Airlines website, instead of Delta Airlines storing that information on their systems in their office or in their data center, they decided to just use one of the cloud service providers like Amazon, Google, Oracle, and when they did that, IBM, of course, all those cloud service providers, when they did that, they transferred your data, so they are no longer storing it on site. So even if their office gets, if there's an accident, if there's a disaster at their office, all their information is stored in the cloud, right? That's the advantage of cloud computing. But in the context of privacy, it exposes you to further risk because you don't know, even though the cloud service provider has told you all your information with us is secure, you can access it. They'll tell you it's 99%, 99.9, maybe 91 or whatever percent available. And they will tell you to a high degree it is secure. It's still, it's still a source of risk. So when we take up cyber risk, we'll look at some of those things, right? Because a risk is a risk. You can't eliminate risk. You can only just mitigate it. So third-party processing, as an auditor, you need to ensure that contracts are enforced. So when I decided to transfer that data, I'm the data controller. I decided to give another party to help me store it or process it. It might not even be a cloud service provider. It might just be maybe a financial accounting firm. Maybe those guys are very good with, or a data analytics firm. We need them to work on our data, and they process it. They store it. Whatever they do with the data is very valuable to us. We want them to do it. That's why we engage their services. As an auditor, what you are looking at is, was their contract in place? And that contract, you need to see a sample of the contract. You need to see sign-offs on them, right? You need to look at the clauses. So these are the audit skills that we mentioned. The contract is an evidence. So the contract between the client and the third party that they engage is an evidence. And when you take that, you start looking at things like, okay, who even gave me this document? Where is this document coming from? Was this signed? When was this, when was it reviewed? All those things we talked about earlier, things that you then apply and you arrive at your conclusion that, look, this contract is, yes, there's a contract in place and it meets 80% of the requirements. So if I come back here and you say maybe the contract mandates that, let's use data security. The contract mandates that they have this level of measures in place to secure the data, but it does not mandate this, then you flag it. You will use an indicator of amber and say, okay, it's partially compliant, but there is room for improvement, and you make your recommendation. The next thing you look at is transfer to foreign country. As I mentioned earlier, there are countries that are notorious for the word privacy does not exist in those countries. It's something we could easily look up. I think to the best of my knowledge, there are about 5, but they could be more than that, depending on the country. Now, okay, let me use a real world example. I think we all know that US as a country and Iran are not, politically aligned, right? And so US might say, oh, we don't if you are obtaining all uses, if you are even as a business, if you do business in US, say Delta Airlines, let's assume they travel from Iran to they have that kind of operation from Iran to or Iraq to America. As long as you are doing business in US and you store and you obtain our citizens or residents data, you should not export that data to another country. if it's in that regulation, right? I mentioned the CCPA. If you see that kind of clause in the regulation, you need to determine that that entity is not doing it. If they are doing it, then you flag it in your audit report. There's no, you just do your job, objective. There's no conflict of interest on your part because you have nothing to, benefit from all of that. Also, a key thing about to know about foreign transfer of data to a foreign country is all data collection media must inform data subject of potential transfer. So when you let's even use websites. When you visit a website for the first time, they will tell you by clicking accept cookies, you agree to the terms of our privacy policy. They are to always put links to their privacy policy, and that is because I think almost all privacy regulations mandates that when you collect people's data, you let them know all the rights. Okay, you let them know their rights. One, you let them know what you want to do with that data, right? You state it explicitly that this is what we're going to do with your data. You state how long you are going to use it. You state if you transfer it to a foreign country, and you also state if you might transfer it to a third party. So most privacy policy, rather most privacy statements you will see, especially when you visit those websites and you click the link to their privacy policy, they won't tell you which of the countries they will send it to. They'll just tell you data you provide may be or might be or may possibly be, transferred to another country. And of course, most of us don't read that. We just click accept and move on. But these are the implications of what we have. The next principle in the GDPR is rights of the data subject. So I just mentioned that every privacy policy or privacy statement must list out all the rights of the data subject, which is you and I, right? Those of us who, every individual that they have their data is a data subject. You need to see your rights. And if you check the privacy statement or the privacy notice, you will see a classical example is when you're on a call, you call the call center and they tell you by staying on the call, this call will be monitored for quality assurance purposes. By staying on the call, you agree to our privacy policy. Please visit our privacy policy at www.this. When you visit that, they must show you this. So as an auditor, if you do that walkthrough, like, okay, please, you ask the client or your liaison or the business process owner that, okay, please, this, the data you obtain from, the voice data you obtain from people on that call your customer care or service center, do you inform them of the privacy policy? They will say yes. You use your phone as an auditor to call that number, and you validate that, right? Because you're always you're always trying to arrive at a factual conclusion, not a factual conclusion. Then you look at the rights of the data subject. A classical example, these are usually the major rights. I think some regulations actually have more or less. Usually, basically the same thing. Right of erasure. So as a data subject, like you and I, you can easily contact Facebook and say, look, I want you guys to erase all the information you have on me in your database. I don't want to have, I'm exercising my right of erasure, right? They will do that immediately. You can also do right of rectification. Okay, I need to correct the information you have on me. Okay, when I filled my application, when I created my profile on Facebook, I said I was male, but now I want to change myself to female, or I don't identify as any of this, right? You can always rectify that, and it's your right that you can express. The next one is right to object. You could say, okay, I object to how you want to use my data. In fact, I don't even want you to have my data anymore, right? You can do that. So all of these rights are things that you need to, when you, as an auditor, when you look at the privacy policy, you need to see these things. When you look at their privacy statement, you need to see that all of these things have been taken care of. And trust me, there are times where you will see, maybe you can see, okay, these are 1, 2, 3, 4, you might see half of them, you might see less, you might see just one missing. And just that one, you still have to indicate that, okay, according to the GDPR, it stated that part of the right of the data subject is this. we recommend that this will be included in this, the privacy statement be updated to reflect this. I think a key thing I might have not mentioned or I didn't emphasize is when you collect people's personal data, at that point of collection, you are required to inform them of all those things that we mentioned, e.g., why do we need your data? What are we using it for? Are we transferring it? Here are your rights. If you want to communicate with us, here is, you can contact us on social call line. You can contact the data privacy officer. You can send us an email, right? Because all of these rights, as a data subject, if you want to express this right or use this right, you need to contact the business. So if you need to contact Facebook, you can go on Facebook's website and look for their contact number. They will tell you in the privacy policy that this is a channel you can use to communicate to us. If you want to, exercise any of these rights, you reach us through that. And finally, we look at data retention policy. The data retention policy, defines the retention period for all data. So as I mentioned, any data you collect, you need to also evaluate how long are we going to keep this data for. If you are collecting people who use Delta Airlines, I'm talking about data from the perspective of Delta Airlines. If we store, a traveler's record, detail in our record, how long do we want to keep it for? Probably someone that only uses our airline once. We can say, okay, we'll keep this data for 8 or 7 or 6 years. And sometimes, you need to, as an auditor, you need to evaluate what is the regulation saying and what's the business saying. And on the business side, so if you are not auditing the client, if you are guiding them, into complying with, helping them implement, their program or develop or improve their program, you also advise them that, look, always keep, it's called data minimization. No, not data minimization. Just use the minimum. Don't keep the data longer than for a longer period than it is needed. And that brings us to the end of our session. Can we ask our questions?
Wow. Thank you so much, Gideon. Thank you. This is a lorry load of information you have shared with us. Wow, thank you. We appreciate you. Thanks. Okay, so my question is in the area of retention. Okay, yeah. Because I know that every data we have its own retention span. Exactly. Okay, so where can one get hold of such? Okay,
the data retention period. So you request for, as an auditor, you ask them to show you their data retention policy. And it is very likely that they have it. If they don't have a data retention policy, that's a major exception. And you document it in your report that, we did not receive evidence, to show that retention periods are defined for the various data assets. Example is, when they created their job portal for candidates to apply for jobs, it's not all candidates that were successful. Some, they applied this year and, they were not successful. How long are we going to keep that data in our system for, right? And if you don't see a data retention policy, you can definitely know that they don't have a structured way of, determining the life cycle of that data. Okay, that all recruitment any candidate that was not successful, we delete their information within a year. Some will say within 6 months, some will say within this. Now, all of those considerations should have been done at the privacy impact assessment stage, where they consider that, okay, we want to start collecting people's recruitment candidates data. How long are we going to keep it for? Do we have the resources? Do we have the what do we call it? Do we have the storage capacity for this kind of data that we are not using anymore? Please erase it after 3 months. And so the retention policy will show you all of that. If they don't have it, you flag it in your report.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Gideon. I think I asked a question, and also Ezekiel asked a question in the chat. Yeah.
Okay. So does one, okay, can I decide to be a data privacy officer without being a consultant for an organization? Most definitely. So you can, okay, this was from Helen. You can have your company, right? And you need to, depending on the regulation. So all these countries, I know of the regulation in Nigeria. I have an idea of what happens here in Canada, right? You can, when you have your company and you say you are a data privacy advice, you could call yourself a data privacy consultant, data privacy advisor. I think there's a way the regulatory bodies will validate your skills. They need to be sure, and this is the reason, right? If you don't work for, as an individual, if you don't work for reputable, if you're not an employee of all those reputable audit firms, and you say you have your own company, which of course is a smaller company, your brand is not yet known, is not yet on that level, they need to be sure that you are skilled, that you are capable, and they will now look at things like your certifications. A vital, a very good certification one can consider is the CDPSE, Certified Data Privacy Solutions Engineer by ISACA. We can take that down. If you want to go into data privacy, you can go and do Certified Data Privacy Solutions Engineer, CDPSE. That's from ISACA. Then another one is, I know there's this CIPP, Certified Privacy Practitioner or something. And the CIPP has different regions. There's for Europe, because I told you privacy is a regional thing. The privacy law in Europe might be different from the privacy law in other parts. And that's just it. Yes. Okay. So the third question, how is CCTV footage classified as a personal data? Okay. So to answer your question, Ezekiel, picture an instance where we're in an age where facial recognition systems are very sophisticated, right? We have sophisticated facial recognition systems. Now imagine you use an airline, say British Airways, or any random, okay, we could say Delta Airlines, and because you visited their office or you were on their premise, okay, yes, because you visited their office or you were on their premise, their CCTV footage captured your image, right? And then because that business transfers they export your data to another country, do you know there's a possibility that a country that you have never set your foot in before would have your identity? The very day you set your foot in their airport, they will know who you are. All your information is in their database. So maybe you have never been to China before, but just because China has an airline, for example, that was operating in, maybe if you are in UK currently, China has an airline that was operating in UK, and in one of their offices there, they captured your CCTV image. And because they export that data to all their region, and maybe back to China, and then China has a facial recognition system and just a very robust database that stores all that information. The very day you set your foot in China, they know who you are, and you'll be shocked that how is this possible? That image can be used to identify you as an individual, and that is why let me give you a more in-depth understanding. So intelligence agencies, right, they always have all those threat lists, right, terrorist lists. And so if an individual is a terrorist in one country, all the intelligence agencies already have that information. That individual, could be in a remote region and he has never been set foot in another region, but that region has his information and they have facial recognition technology. So the very day he shows up at the airport, right from the airport, as soon as he presents his passport, they know who you are. They have you on information because we're dealing with intelligence agencies here. So that's the implication of CCTV footage. CCTV footage and voice data are regarded as personal data. I hope I answered your question. So
yeah, definitely. Sorry, I have one more question.
Yeah.
Yeah, based on the audit, I know we have internal and external audit. I don't know if I'm right about that. So my question is, how does an internal audit differ from an external audit?
Okay, that's a very good question. So an internal audit is an effort, is usually an effort by the organization to, assess themselves. It's a third arm, an independent arm, right, that does internal audits, right, and they generate their reports and send to the executive to the senior management managers. Now, the difference between the internal audit and external audit is that the external audit is more, in theory and in concept, is actually more objective. So if I'm working in the internal audit if I work at Google, but I work in internal audit, right? The concept or the idea is that, or the practice is that if we engage an external firm, the things that an external firm would probably see would not be flagged by the internal firm. And so external audits are giving they are giving higher priority. External audits are giving higher priority than internal audits. I hope I've been able to answer your question.
Yeah, definitely.
So please, any other question?
Yeah, I guess there is no other question.
Sorry, there is. The question is to connect with you. Okay. So
okay. To connect with me, you can just check me up on LinkedIn. You could search Gideon Babatunde. You'll see me on LinkedIn, and we can, get to talk.
All right. Okay.
Yes.
That's good. Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Thank
everyone.
you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining today's class. And just like Gideon said, next week we will be talking more about cyber risk management, the first 1 hour of next week. And the last 1 hour, we'll also be inviting another guest speaker, Chinua. Chinua is a cybersecurity analyst in one of the in Templify at Berlin, I think, or Germany. So we'll get just like a fireside chat, right? Just bring your questions, whatever you think you want to ask in cybersecurity, roadmap, theoretical question, and anything, including myself, Gideon, and Chinua, will definitely ask your questions after Gideon's session. So 1 hour for questions and answers, and any clarification next week, the last 1 hour. I will send the itinerary on WhatsApp though. Yeah. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful weekend. I said weekend. Week.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.